Have you ever stopped to wonder how a nation's pride, its confidence, its entire security apparatus can be shattered in just a few brutal days?
It's a powerful question.
We're talking about a complete organizational and military collapse. And, one that resulted not from a lack of bravery, not at all, but from a profound failure of leadership.
And that question really sets the stage perfectly for the 1962 Sino-Indian War. Today, we're undertaking a really critical deep dive into the chronicle of that catastrophe.
Which chronicle is that?
It's Brigadier J.P. Dalvi's firsthand account, the book titled Himalayan Blunder.
Right. That title alone, Himalayan Blunder, it's quite an indictment, isn't it? But the man behind the narrative, that gives it, well, unparalleled weight.
Absolutely. Dalvi wasn't, sitting in some comfortable headquarters just analyzing maps. He was there
On the front line?
on the front line leading his men. And crucially, he ended up a prisoner of war.
Wow. So he saw it from both sides in a way, command and captivity.
Exactly. And that unique perspective allowed him to chronicle this event, not merely as, say, a border skirmish or just another military defeat. No, he frames it as India's greatest military disaster.
A failure of statecraft, strategy, political judgment too.
All of it. A failure that cost countless lives and enormous national prestige. The book is chilling, really is.
So our mission in this deep dive then is to follow Dalby's path. Walk through the stages of how this catastrophe unfolded.
Precisely. We need to meticulously walk through the stages of that systemic catastrophe. We've got to move beyond just the, simple historical facts.
And uncover the hard truths he laid bare.
Yes, examine the precise mechanisms, the missed opportunities, and really analyze the profound lessons. Because these lessons, they should echo, shouldn't they?
Not just in India's defense policy, I imagine.
No, far broader, in civil-military relations everywhere, really. And in global geopolitics, whenever, political hubris threatens to override military reality.
Okay, so get ready. Because this sounds like a journey into the heart of how systemic organizational failure often gets masked by denial.
That's a good way to put it. Denial is a huge theme here.
Right, let's unpack this then, starting right where Dalvi begins, which is the preface of the book. You mentioned it's chilling, and it sounds like it's not just a routine introduction.
No, not at all. It's more like a lament. A deeply self-reflective warning about what he sees as India's historical tendency to repeat its mistakes. It sets a very somber tone.
What's the core of that lament?
He opens with this stark, almost heartbreaking paradox. He points out that India has this historical pattern, sadly, of military failures, where famously brave, resourceful soldiers, well, they often achieve very little.
Why? Because they're let down.
Exactly. Because they are inevitably let down by inept political or sometimes military leadership. For Dalvi, 1962 wasn't some isolated tragic event. It was the most devastating continuation of this deeply ingrained historical trend.
So he's saying the soldier is always ready to pay the price.
Yes. But the leaders are rarely ready to actually plan for the consequences of the policies they set in motion.
Valor is tragically insufficient without strategy, organization, and crucially, accountability. Is that the message?
That's right at the heart of it. And that focus is sharpest in his dedication.
Ah, the dedication. Who is it to?
It's dedicated to those who fought gallantly, but were, in his words, betrayed by what he acidly terms Delhi-centric decision-makers.
Delhi-centric. That phrase really jumps out. What does he mean by that? What does it encapsulate?
Oh, it's loaded with meaning. It suggests a political and military headquarters mentality that is, physically, strategically, and psychologically disconnected from the ground reality.
People operating in a bubble, essentially.
Pretty much. Policymakers, bureaucrats operating within the sort of Luchin's Delhi political sphere, where reputation and political projection, what he calls political prophecy, mattered more than the tactical needs of troops who were freezing at 14,000 feet.
Political prophecy replacing sound military strategy.
That's his core warning. It's not just about assigning blame, though he does that. It's about understanding that sound military strategy cannot, absolutely must not, be replaced by political wishes or hopeful thinking.
You can't just proclaim peace while ignoring a visible military buildup on your border.
Exactly. You can't. And that failure to heed reality, well, that leads directly to the core problem of the late 1950s buildup, the warnings. They were just completely brushed aside.
Because of what Dalvi calls remarkable complacency.
Yes, remarkable and ultimately fatal complacency. Fueled, it seems, by a kind of ideological blindness.
How so?
Dalvi meticulously points out that senior military figures, the ones with actual ground experience, were consistently raising alarm bells. The most notable example is General Timaya,
Right, a respected figure.
very respected, and he repeatedly explicitly warned the political leaderships, specifically Prime Minister Nehru and the very controversial Defense Minister Krishna Menon, about China's growing threat. And it was visible.
These weren't just vague feelings then.
Not at all. These were based on hard intelligence. They were seeing Chinese road construction, troop movements, clear expansion of Chinese infrastructure into disputed areas, concrete facts.
But the political reaction wasn't to mobilize or prepare defenses.
No, it was essentially denial, rooted in a very specific geopolitical framework they held dear.
Okay, what framework was that?
Well, the source material really highlights that these warnings were either ignored or actively dismissed. There was a sort of chilling intellectual arrogance, perhaps,
From Nehru and Menon.
from Nehru and his inner circle, yes, particularly Menon. They were deeply invested in the policy of non-alignment, staying out of the Cold War blocs, and also in this idealistic concept of panchil.
The 5 principles of peaceful coexistence.
Exactly. They believed, almost religiously it seems, that a formal large-scale war with a fellow Asian nation, especially one they saw as a kind of diplomatic ally, well, it was simply impossible, or at least strategically undesirable for China to attempt.
So their foreign policy idealism completely blinded their defense policy realism.
It seems that way. They chose to rely on diplomatic rhetoric, on speeches and pronouncements, while neglecting the hard intelligence and the very visible facts on the ground.
Which meant resources weren't allocated, troops weren't prepared.
Precisely. This kind of ideological insulation meant that resources just weren't allocated correctly. Preparation wasn't made. And the military professionals who understood the real danger, people like Timaya, they were marginalized, sidelined.
And that failure, that gap between intelligence and policy, that's the first major crack Dalvi points to.
Yes, the first fundamental systemic crack in the foundation. It created this internal vacuum where, political confidence somehow thrived while actual military preparedness just withered away.
Okay, so if Section 1 was about the leadership ignoring external warnings from China, Section 2 sounds like it digs into how they actively crippled their own military from the inside.
That's a good summary. Dalvi identifies this dangerous gulf between the civilian government and the military command as a really powerful motif running through the entire disaster.
A civil-military disconnect. What did that look like in practice?
Well, it wasn't just, poor communication or bureaucratic friction. It was an environment steeped in political mistrust, and some argue active sabotage of professional military advice.
Sabotage. That's a strong word.
It is, but Dalvi implies it strongly regarding Defense Minister Krishna Menon. He was known for his political zeal, sure, but also for a deep distrust of the traditional military establishment.
Why the distrust?
He often seemed to perceive them as insufficiently aligned with his socialist ideology, not politically reliable perhaps. And Dalvi suggests Menon actively ensured that inadequate preparation occurred, maybe even deliberately.
So the internal issue wasn't just poor coordination, it was a deliberate sidelining of military expertise because of politics.
Yes, that's the argument Dalvi makes. And the consequence was chaos. Deployments became haphazard, driven by political expediency.
Like what? What kind of expediency?
Like the need to simply show a flag in a disputed area to make a political point, rather than any sound tactical necessity or logistical possibility.
So planting flags without thinking how to defend them.
Pretty much. There was this critical, pervasive misunderstanding, or maybe refusal to understand, the enemy's capabilities and intentions. Because the civilian leadership refused to believe the assessments coming from their own uniformed officers.
It sounds like 2 different realities operating side by side.
Exactly. The civilian government and the senior military command, or at least parts of it, were operating in 2 entirely different realities. And as we see time and again in military history, right? When the generals and the politicians aren't aligned, when there isn't mutual respect,
The frontline troops pay the price.
they're the ones who pay the ultimate brutal price every single time.
And that price was paid, Dalvi argues, directly through the implementation of this infamous forward policy. This policy seems absolutely central to his indictment. It really set the stage for defeat.
Oh, absolutely central. Can you detail exactly what this policy involved? Why was it so disastrous from a purely military perspective?
The forward policy was, well, almost purely a political maneuver. It was about projecting strength, mostly for domestic public opinion, I think.
How did it do that?
It dictated the forced occupation of these remote Himalayan posts, often tiny, isolated outposts, specifically established to assert Indian territorial claims and physically demonstrate resolve against Chinese incursions.
So putting soldiers way out there as symbols.
Essentially, yes. The entire purpose seems driven by this political desire to not lose face, which was a really powerful motivator in that era. But it completely ignored every single ground reality. It sounds like tactical suicide disguised as geopolitical assertiveness. Is that fair?
That's basically the core tragedy of it. Dalvi highlights the fatal flaws inherent in the policy itself. First, it ignored the logistical impossibility of supporting troops at those extreme altitudes in that terrain.
Right, getting supplies up there must have been a nightmare.
A nightmare. These forward posts were often miles and miles beyond any secure supply line, perched in positions that were tactically indefensible.
Indefensible? Why?
Because they could be easily bypassed, surrounded, cut off by a determined enemy. They weren't chosen for tactical advantage, they were chosen for their location on a map relative to the disputed border.
So we're talking about sending small patrols, maybe platoons, hundreds of miles away from established bases.
Right.
Demanding they hold ground with no access to heavy weapons, probably no proper winter supplies, and no realistic expectation of reinforcement.
Exactly that. And crucially, no realistic plan for withdrawal either. That was politically unacceptable.
Withdrawal wasn't allowed.
The policy demanded permanent presence. It refused to acknowledge the tactical necessity of flexible defense, which sometimes requires withdrawal to stronger positions, or having strong support facilities nearby.
But the politics wouldn't allow for that flexibility.
No. The political drive to plant the flag, to be there, outweighed the military reality of defending that flag, especially when that flag was planted in some isolated spot, often overlooking enemy positions where the Chinese had already spent years building roads and infrastructure.
So the outcome was inevitable, really.
It seems so in hindsight. The inevitable outcome was that these Indian posts were left isolated, outnumbered, and just perfectly exposed for the Chinese assault when it came.
And compounding that flawed strategy was this desperate lack of basic preparation that Dalvi documents. As the confrontation got closer, it's staggering to read about the conditions.
It is genuinely shocking. As diplomatic talks were failing and the confrontation became pretty much imminent, the Indian Army was, Dalvi argues, fundamentally and almost criminally unprepared.
What kinds of shortages are we talking about?
The list that Dalvi details is just agonizing. Inadequate weapons, think obsolete World War II era rifles in many cases, insufficient mortar ammunition, almost zero air support or artillery support available to cover the ground forces.
Just unbelievable. But the worst failure, perhaps the most damning one,
Was the critical lack of winter clothing. Basic survival gear.
you're fighting a war in the Himalayas, potentially the coldest, most punishing mountain environment on Earth, and your troops don't have adequate winter gear.
It beggars belief, doesn't it?
That's not just a lack of logistics. That feels like an intentional choice by someone high up to deny the reality of where they were sending these men.
And Dalvi insists that denial came from the very top levels in Delhi. His sources indicate that commanders back in Delhi, still somehow convinced that China wouldn't attack in force, kept assuring themselves and their subordinates that this situation was under control.
Just wishful thinking at the highest levels.
This psychological denial, it paralyzed resource allocation. Field officers like Dalvi, they saw the danger firsthand. They requested specialized Arctic gear, proper fortification materials, reinforcements.
And the requests?
They just fell on deaf ears,
No.
or got tangled in bureaucracy, deliberately slowed down. So they were left tactically vulnerable, psychologically isolated because they knew they weren't being supported, and relying on inadequate, often secondhand equipment.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. And the sheer number of soldiers lost to exposure to hypothermia, frostbite, before they even saw the enemy.
Yeah.
That's Dalvi's powerful evidence of just profound organizational betrayal.
So the flawed policy was cemented, preparations were basically non-existent, the fuse was well and truly lit. Dalvi then shifts the narrative, doesn't he, to the horrifying moment-by-moment details of the frontline tragedy.
Yes, he takes you right there.
He recounts the Battle of Sengjong just days before the main assault. Why is this particular battle so crucial in his account?
Sengjong is absolutely essential for understanding the psychological toll of that Delhi-centric mindset in action. Major Chaudhry led a patrol into a hazardous area right up against the Chinese positions.
And they encountered overwhelming force.
Yes, overwhelming, prepared Chinese numbers. And despite the incredible bravery of the Indian patrol, They actually achieved some initial tactical successes, pushed the Chinese back a bit. But the commanders, including Dalvi, who was overseeing it, were operating under these highly restrictive, absolutely crippling directives from higher command. Directives that essentially tied their hands.
This goes beyond standard rules of engagement, right? I remember reading he recounts this agonizing decision not to permit crucial supporting fire, like mortars.
Exactly. Mortars and machine guns. That's the ethical nightmare at the heart of this disaster. Dalvi recounts having to make that decision not to allow supporting fire.
Why? It wasn't because they didn't have the weapons or it wasn't tactically necessary?
Oh, it was desperately needed.
Yeah.
Tactically essential to cover their men, to suppress the Chinese fire. But the reason was these unwise directives from above regarding, quote, strategic considerations and escalation.
Strategic considerations, meaning politics.
Meaning politics. Delhi was still so utterly focused on the political narrative of non-escalation, trying to prove India wasn't the aggressor, that they were willing to sacrifice tactical advantage.
And ultimately sacrifice their own men.
Yes, sacrifice their men to avoid provoking a full-scale response, which, ironically, the Chinese were already launching.
So you're watching your soldiers fighting, maybe dying, and you're actively holding back crucial defensive fire because headquarters, hundreds of miles away, is worried about the political fallout of escalating a conflict that's already escalating.
That is the ultimate tragic example of political vanity overriding basic battlefield survival. It's just devastating.
The burden on Dalvi must have been immense.
And must have been unbearable. The emotional and ethical weight of that decision, knowing you are sacrificing tactical reality, sacrificing your men's safety to satisfy some distant, abstract political directive, it's vividly brought to life in Dalvi's unsparing writing.
It really shows how detached strategic thinking can actively doom the troops on the ground.
Absolutely. It places an impossible moral choice on the field commander. Obey a disastrous order from above, or save your men and risk court-martial and disgrace.
And this tragic preliminary clash at Sengjiang, it led almost immediately to the ultimate disaster for Dalvi personally, didn't it? The annihilation of his own unit.
Yes, his own 7th Infantry Brigade at Thagla Ridge.
Annihilation seems like a strong word, but is it accurate?
It's the only word that feels appropriate for what happened there.
Yeah.
Dalvi paints this picture of, again, unmatched individual bravery from his soldiers. Jats, Rajputs, Gurkhas, fighting fiercely.
But against overwhelming force.
Overwhelming force and meticulous preparation on the Chinese side. The speed of the defeat was just staggering. The entire brigade, a major formation, was completely overwhelmed within about 3 hours of the main Chinese assault, beginning on October 20th.
3 hours? How?
The Chinese hit them with overwhelming artillery, coordinated mortar fire, heavy machine gun fire, and these disciplined infantry maneuvers. They were designed specifically to bypass and isolate the already exposed Indian forward posts. They just rolled over them.
So it was a clash between individual soldier valor on one side and profound organizational and systemic superiority on the other.
Precisely. Dalvi's unit, the 7th Brigade, was effectively doomed by these external factors long before the first Chinese shot was fired.
Because of the forward policy, the lack of support?
All of it. Soldiers were lost not just to enemy fire, but tragically, as we mentioned, to the hostile environment itself. The lack of proper defensive trenches because they weren't allowed to dig in some places, the non-existent communication lines that failed almost immediately, the failure of promised supply drops, the inadequacy of their light weaponry against Chinese heavy artillery.
It all added up.
It all added up to illustrate exactly how these foundational organizational failures doomed their valor. Their courage was essentially wasted because their leadership had failed to provide even the minimum conditions necessary for an effective defense.
And after the destruction of his brigade, Dalvi himself was captured.
Yes, she became a prisoner of war.
And his account shifts then, from commander to prisoner. That must give us a unique, maybe chilling insight into the other side's planning and preparation.
It really does. His experience as a POW is perhaps one of the most revelatory parts of his entire account, because it definitively shatters the Indian narrative that was prevalent then, the idea of an unexpected, sudden escalation by China.
How so? What did he see?
Dalvi noted, with a kind of professional amazement actually, that the Chinese hadn't just planned the offensive meticulously. They had also prepared specialized, seemingly permanent prisoner of war camps deep in the rear areas in Tibet.
Camps ready before the fighting started.
Ready and waiting. And even more tellingly, they had stocks of standardized winter gear, padded clothing, boots, hats specifically manufactured and waiting for their anticipated Indian captives.
Wow. Providing winter gear for the enemy you plan to capture, that speaks volumes about premeditation, doesn't it?
It screams premeditation.
Mm-hmm.
That level of detailed logistical provision, down to the enemy's winter clothing needs, proves this wasn't just some aggressive response to a border skirmish that got out of hand.
No, this was a well-executed, long-term military operation designed to deliver a specific, crushing blow.
That's the inescapable conclusion Dalvi draws. It was planned, rehearsed, and executed with precision. Furthermore, he recounts the systematic psychological warfare the Chinese employed in the camps.
What did that involve?
They used sophisticated interrogation techniques, yes, partly for military intelligence, but a lot of it was focused propaganda efforts.
Aimed at breaking morale.
Definitely. Often comparing the supposed egalitarianism of the Chinese Revolution to the perceived corruption and rigid class system within the Indian Army and Indian society.
Yeah.
Trying to drive wedges.
Did it work?
Well, Dalvi provides this vital counterpoint. He emphasizes the immense dignity and solidarity maintained among the captured Indian soldiers, officers, and men alike.
Despite the conditions, despite the propaganda.
Yes, even in captivity, facing uncertainty and hardship, they largely held their ranks, maintained their composure, supported each other, and refused to be psychologically broken.
And for Dalvi, that must have confirmed his core belief.
Absolutely. It confirmed for him, yet again, that the failure lay not with the fighting man, the Jawan, but squarely with the leaders who had sent them into that impossible situation in the first place.
So Dalvi survived the war, survived captivity, and eventually returned to India. The analysis that follows in the book, it sounds like it doesn't pull any punches.
No, absolutely not. He takes on the incredibly difficult and probably dangerous for him personally task of laying the blame. And he does it in unsparing, meticulous terms.
This section must be a really brave and essential demand for accountability. Where does he primarily lay that blame?
His assignment of responsibility is surgically precise, really. Primary blame, he argues, lays squarely with the political leaders, specifically Prime Minister Nehru and Defense Minister Krishna Mahena.
On what grounds?
He indicts them not just for ignoring those expert warnings we talked about, or for being ideologically blinded, but specifically for actively interfering in the military chain of command.
How did they interfere?
Most damagingly, by appointing senior officers based on blatant political favoritism, on personal loyalty, rather than on actual military merit or proven war experience.
And one of the most prominent and controversial figures targeted by Dalvi in this regard is Lieutenant General B.M. Call, right?
Yes, Call is central to Dalvi's critique of the command structure. Dalvi reserves particular sharp criticism for him.
Why Call specifically?
Because Call lacked any significant combat command experience, any real war experience. Yet he was elevated rapidly through political connections, particularly his closeness to Nehru, and given command of the corps facing the Chinese.
Exactly. Given command of the newly formed 5E Corps with dangerously unrealistic military objectives handed down from Delhi, Call was perceived by many senior military professionals at the time as essentially a political favorite.
Someone who would implement Delhi's policy without asking difficult questions.
Precisely. Someone who wouldn't question the tactical absurdity of the forward policy because his loyalty was primarily political. And his elevation, Dalvi argues, sidelined numerous competent and experienced commanders who actually understood the realities of the Himalayan front.
So the highest levels of field command were staffed by people valued for political loyalty over military capability.
That's the damning accusation. And this political favoritism at the very top, it inevitably led to catastrophic operational failures all the way down the chain of command. But Dalvi's criticism, it isn't reserved only for the political class and their favored generals, is it? He also extends it to senior officers who are otherwise seen as competent.
Yes, and this is perhaps the most profound institutional criticism in the entire book. He calls out what he sees as a lack of moral courage among some senior respected officers.
Moral courage, what does he mean by that?
He argues that senior officers like General Tamaya himself, who possessed the professional competence to know that the forward policy was strategically flawed, even disastrous.
They should have done more.
Dalvi argues they should have resigned in protest rather than acquiesce and implement policies they knew, or should have known, would result in disaster for the men under their command.
Wow, that is an extraordinarily high standard of moral courage he's demanding there. We have to stop and think about the magnitude of that. Is he really asking commanders to commit career suicide for the sake of integrity?
Dalvi would likely argue yes. because the failure to do so, in his view, resulted in the actual suicide, the actual deaths of thousands of soldiers under their command.
So he sees acquiescence in the face of known disaster as a failure of leadership just as bad as incompetence.
Pretty much equivalent, yes. The catastrophic trickle-down effect of this perceived lack of moral courage, this lack of accountability at the highest military levels, was the systemic breakdown of command integrity, and ultimately the betrayal of the fighting forces.
The lesson being?
The lesson, for Dalvi, is that if the professional military leadership is incapable of saying, "No, minister, this plan is militarily unsound," to a politically driven, disastrous plan, then they share the blame for the catastrophe that follows. They can't just say, "I was following orders."
That clarity about India's internal chaos, the blame game, the lack of courage, it's only magnified when Dalvi pivots to analyze the Chinese preparation, isn't it? The strategic contrast must be stark.
Oh, incredibly stark. On the Indian side, as we've discussed, denial, political interference, obsolete equipment, chaotic logistics, lack of winter gear, just a mess.
And on the Chinese side?
Meticulous, centralized planning, and brutal efficiency in execution. The People's Liberation Army, the PLA, had distinct strategic advantages.
Such as?
Most notably, recent and successful combat experience. They had fought the technologically superior, well-equipped U.S. Army to a standstill in the Korean War just a decade earlier.
Right, experience counts. Especially in tough terrain.
Hugely. That experience made them highly adept at large-scale maneuver warfare, particularly in mountainous and difficult terrain like the Himalayas. They knew how to coordinate logistics, fire support, infantry assaults in high-altitude environments. Practical stuff.
So they possessed the practical, large-scale operational know-how that India's senior command structure, perhaps compromised by politics, completely lacked at that point.
It seems so. Absolutely. And their logistics, compared to India's shambles, were a masterpiece of planning for that specific campaign.
How so?
Dalvi highlights that their preparation included establishing robust, reliable supply lines, often based on extensive road networks they had built specifically for this campaign over the preceding years in Tibet and Aksai Chin.
They were preparing logistically long before 1962.
Years before. They had the standardized winter uniforms we mentioned, not just for themselves, but anticipating prisoners.
Yeah.
And they deployed designated specialized intelligence teams.
Intelligence teams?
Yes, who were fluent in various Indian languages and dialects, Hindi, Garhwali, others. This demonstrates a deep level of preparation that extended far beyond just a simple border push.
It was designed to maximize the military effect, obviously, but also
to execute effective psychological operations simultaneously. Understand the enemy, demoralize them, gather intelligence efficiently.
And beyond the purely military preparation, Dalvi notes their strategy extended deeply into the psychological and informational realm, too.
Correct. He observes they engaged in quite sophisticated psychological operations, even during the fighting and certainly in the POW camps.
Aimed at what?
Aimed at manipulating the international narrative, trying to frame India as the aggressor, despite evidence to the contrary, and deliberately targeting Indian civilian and military morale through calculated propaganda.
How did they deliver that propaganda?
Directly to the POWs, as we discussed, but also reportedly using pamphlets and even loudspeakers on the front lines during lulls in fighting. The Chinese were fighting a propaganda war almost as effectively as they were fighting the ground war.
That level of comprehensive preparation, military, logistical, psychological, it really underscores why Dalvi sees the 1962 defeat as rooted in this profound systemic disparity, doesn't it? Not just a failure of a few isolated battalions on a bad day.
Exactly. It was a mismatch born from years of differing priorities, preparation, and political influence on military matters.
Okay, shifting now towards the legacy of the book and the war itself, let's revisit that core emotional theme that seems to sustain Dalvi's entire narrative, the soldier's betrayal. His deep respect for the ordinary fighting man is palpable, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It's the emotional anchor of Himalayan Blunder. He consistently, almost painfully, returns to the theme that the ordinary Indian soldier, the Jawan, was resourceful, incredibly brave, and utterly undaunted by the horrific conditions or the enemy they faced. But the central heartbreak, the core tragedy for Dalvi, is that these men were ultimately comprehensively let down by those in authority, not by any failure of their own courage, their own competence, or their will to fight.
So the emotional tragedy isn't just the military defeat, the lost territory, the casualties.
No, it's deeper than that. It's the profound heartbreak of knowing you were placed in an unwinnable situation, given equipment almost guaranteed to fail, often denied the means to even defend yourself properly by your own country's leadership. That's the betrayal he highlights.
And this powerful indictment of leadership, it naturally leads to Dalvi's principal forward-looking argument, doesn't it? Which is this fierce call for institutional reform, specifically focusing on the structure of civil-military relations.
Yes, this is really the crux of the book's enduring relevance, why it's still studied today. Dalvi argues fiercely, passionately, for the necessity of genuine, structured, and respectful dialogue between the political leadership and the military professionals.
It has to be a two-way street.
Absolutely. Politicians must understand and ideally trust the professional judgment of their military experts on military matters. And crucially, the military leadership must be empowered structurally, culturally, to offer candid, unvarnished, professional judgment.
Without fear of political reprisal.
Without fear of political reprisal or having their careers ruined for speaking unwelcome truths. Unless the military is structurally empowered to do that, Dalvi warns, history will absolutely repeat itself. Doesn't matter how many advanced weapons you buy.
So the concept of speaking truth to power isn't just some abstract moral ideal for him. It's a practical survival mechanism for the nation itself.
Exactly. It's about national security, ultimately. He advocates strongly for creating a culture of institutional resilience within the defense establishment.
How do you build that?
By fostering open, analytical discussions of failure, not political cover-ups, not finding convenient scapegoats, which he clearly witnessed firsthand in the aftermath of '62.
You have to dissect failures honestly to learn from them.
Precisely. Only by openly acknowledging and dissecting failures, however painful, can an institution truly learn, evolve, and hopefully forge a better future from the ashes of catastrophe. Without genuine accountability, Dalvi implies, all the money and all the material in the world cannot save you from the consequences of the next politically motivated blunder.
Ali's own account of his return from captivity and the general aftermath in India, the national humiliation, the soul-searching, the blame games that must have been deeply frustrating for him, especially given the perspective he gained as a POW.
Oh, profoundly frustrating, reading between the lines. He describes a post-conflict period marked by this immense national humiliation, yes, but also, frustratingly for him, a deep refusal by many of the relevant authorities to accept genuine responsibility or to draw the really substantive structural lessons.
People were looking for easy answers, scapegoats.
There was definitely a strong drive for scapegoating, exemplified perhaps by the targeting of some field commanders. While the architects of the disaster at the highest political and military policy levels often escaped detailed, critical scrutiny in the official inquiries that followed.
His frustration must have been palpable.
It is palpable in the writing, and it contrasts so sharply with the immense solidarity and moral composure he witnessed among his fellow prisoners during captivity. That dignity in adversity, he suggests, was maybe a small but powerful glimmer of hope amidst the wider national despair and finger-pointing.
So the final message of Himalayan Blunder, it really resonates far beyond that specific war in 1962, doesn't it? It stands as a kind of enduring admonition for future policymakers, maybe everywhere.
I think it absolutely does. It's a timeless warning about that dangerous intersection of political ambition, ego, and military reality. The lessons Dalvi distilled, the critical need for preparedness, the importance of humility and leadership, and the profound dangers of ego-driven decision-making, they remain absolutely vital.
For any nation maintaining a large defense force.
For any nation, really. Dalvi's closing message feels crystal clear. Every single generation must heed the hard-won lessons of failure, because to neglect them, to sweep them under the rug,
Is to court disaster anew.
yes, is to court disaster anew, inevitably paying for the pride, the arrogance, the mistakes of a few leaders with the blood of many ordinary soldiers. Hashtag tag outro feeler.
Right, so what we've distilled from Dalvi's powerful narrative today is, well, it's a comprehensive, often heart-bracing indictment of a system that, in 1962, seemed to prioritize political ego and ideological dogma over strategic reality and, ultimately, over the lives of its own soldiers.
We've explored the catastrophic cost of that civil-military disconnect he described so vividly, and reaffirmed the incredible valor of the soldiers who were, in his view, fundamentally betrayed by the very leaders they were serving.
Himalayan Blunder, then, it remains this critical, uncomfortable call for institutional reckoning and genuine accountability.
It really does. And remember that dedication you mentioned earlier. Dalvi dedicated his book to those who believe a nation's leaders owe the highest responsibility to their soldiers.
And that responsibility goes beyond just emotional patriotism or rhetoric.
Way beyond. It demands rigorous, non-negotiable competence, honesty, and the courage to face reality, however unpleasant.
And that leaves us, and you listening, with a final provocative thought to consider. One that maybe defines the true, enduring legacy of 1962, not just for India, but for any democracy grappling with these issues.
Which is,
When the political strategy being pushed from the top is clearly demonstrably disastrous from a military standpoint, what does it truly take? What needs to be in place for a military command structure to develop the institutional resilience, and perhaps more importantly, the moral courage necessary?
necessary to do what?
Not just to advise against it quietly, but to effectively push back, to say no, this will lead to disaster against that disastrous political policy, without the individuals involved feeling professional or personal ruin.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. That, perhaps, is the ultimate test of leadership, both political and military. And Dalvi's work forces us to confront it head on.